there comes a pivotal moment when everything changes, a shift that not only alters perspectives, but also challenges the very essence of what we consider possible. This moment arrives when an organization, typically focused on intelligence gathering, tactical operations, and strategic dominance, begins investigating phenomena that the rest of the world dismisses as pure fantasy. This isn't because they have suddenly embraced mysticism, but because the data simply wouldn't stop presenting itself. It starts with unexplainable occurrences, consciousness leaving the body, information being accessed across distances without the aid of technology, and time defying the very rules we've been taught to adhere to. At the heart of each of these reports lies a training protocol known as the gateway process. Now, before you dismiss this as merely a collection of fantastical ideas, let me clarify something crucial. This isn't about high-tech equipment, pharmaceuticals, or decades of isolation spent poring over ancient texts. What we're dealing with here is much more fundamental and accessible. This is about frequency, intentional breathing, focused awareness, and a systematic approach to inner training that anyone, yes, anyone, can engage with. It's rooted in simple techniques that alter the state of consciousness, and when we can grasp that, we unlock a door to understanding why a strategic intelligence organization would invest valuable resources in studying such concepts. The Monroe Institute, a pioneer in this field, developed a foundational technology they called Hemisync, which stands for hemisphere synchronization. The principle behind Hemisync is deceptively simple. Your brain operates in two distinct hemispheres, each processing reality through its own unique lens. In most people, these hemispheres are slightly out of phase with one another, like two drummers trying to play the same rhythm, but never quite syncing up. Hemisync addresses this misalignment by utilizing binaural beats. This involves playing two distinct tones in each ear, with a slight frequency difference between them. Your brain doesn't process them as separate sounds. Instead, it creates a third, phantom frequency, the difference between the two tones. This phenomenon is called frequency following response. Essentially, your brain begins to tune in to this new frequency, much like a radio tuning into a specific channel. This process is not metaphysical or poetic. It's rooted in neurobiology. As the two hemispheres synchronize, your attention shifts. The mental energy that would otherwise scatter in 1,000 directions becomes focused and consolidated into a coherent beam. Dr. Stuart T. Emlow, a psychiatrist who studied this phenomenon, documented how Hemisync helps concentrate the brain's energetic output. He likened an untrained mind to a household lamp that casts light in all directions, illuminating everything around it, but with no real depth or focus. In contrast, a synchronized mind functions like a laser beam, coherent, concentrated, and capable of penetrating barriers that scattered light cannot. This is where the real implications of Hemisync emerge. The process wasn't designed merely for relaxation or mental clarity. It was engineered to fundamentally alter the state of consciousness from which we operate. If reality is filtered through consciousness, then transforming consciousness can fundamentally alter what reality means to you. This is why strategic intelligence organizations would be so invested in such techniques, not because they're merely philosophically interesting, but because a mind capable of extending beyond conventional limitations isn't just about spiritual growth. It's about operational capability. At this point, you might still be skeptical, and that's perfectly okay. You don't have to accept these claims at face value. What comes next is not about astral projection or precognition, but about vibrational resonance, an understanding that your physical body isn't just biological matter moving through space. Rather, it's an instrument tuned to specific frequencies. And for most of us, it's been resonating throughout our lives, whether we've been conscious of it or not. Now, Resonance may sound like abstract spiritual jargon, but when you see it in concrete terms, it becomes undeniable. For example, place two acoustic guitars in the same room. Pluck a string on one, and if the second guitar has a string tuned to match that frequency, it will begin to vibrate in response quietly, yet unmistakably. There's no physical contact, no mysterious force at work, just the laws of physics and vibrational sympathy. Human consciousness operates on the same principles, though most people never notice it because the medium is invisible. The gateway process integrates this concept through a practice known as resonant tuning. At first glance, resonant tuning may sound strange, involving vocalization, specifically humming, but what might seem absurd on the surface becomes incredibly powerful when you experience it directly. A low hum, sustained and generated from deep within the chest cavity, sends vibrations through the skull, triggering a release, stabilizing the mind. The vocalization itself is not the focus. What matters is the effect it creates. It draws your scattered attention and energy into one focused stream, much like collecting pieces of yourself that have been dispersed for years. But resonant tuning goes beyond merely calming your nerves. It literally restructures your bioelectric field. Every cell in your body resonates at a specific frequency, including your heart, your brain waves, and even your DNA. When you generate a coherent vibration through vocalization, you're tuning your entire biological system, much like tuning an instrument before a performance. Ancient traditions understood this intuitively. The Sanskrit mantras, Tibetan singing bowls, Gregorian chants, all these practices used frequencies to induce specific energetic responses and altered states of consciousness. What the Monroe Institute did was take these ancient techniques, systematize them, test them, and document them in a way that makes them reproducible. This was the foundation of the gateway process, which not only introduced resonant tuning, but also a method they called the energy conversion box. The concept is deceptively simple. You create a mental container in which you consciously deposit all the fragments of your attention, unresolved responsibilities, accumulated anxieties, negative emotional patterns, everything that normally clutters your awareness. Visualization alone won't achieve this. It requires conscious intention. When you engage in this practice, you're conditioning your mind to release its addiction to mental turbulence. And this is important because most people don't realize how much energy they lose each day through unconscious worry, unprocessed emotion, and mental loops that don't serve any purpose other than maintaining the status quo of suffering. The energy conversion box isn't about suppression. It's about consciously managing your mental energy. You're not pretending that problems don't exist, but you're creating the mental space where solutions can emerge naturally from a deeper, more grounded place of intelligence. Once you've cleared that mental clutter, the next step in the process is what they call the energy balloon. This is a mental exercise where you visualize an energetic sphere surrounding your body. The shape and nature of this sphere can vary from person to person. Some see it as protective armor, while others perceive it as a luminous membrane. Regardless of how you conceptualize it, this energy balloon serves several purposes. First, it is a declaration of sovereignty. You're asserting that your consciousness is your domain and you decide what enters and what stays out. Second, it acts as a filter. As you begin to access expanded states of awareness, you also become more sensitive to subtle energies and emotional fields. Without a protective boundary, this sensitivity can become overwhelming. Finally, the energy balloon serves as a focusing mechanism. By consciously constructing this boundary, you're training your mind to maintain sustained focus, a foundational skill for more advanced consciousness work. Now, an additional component of the gateway process involves aligning your body's natural frequency with Earth's electromagnetic field, specifically the Schumann resonance, which resonates around 7.5 Hz. This frequency, sometimes described as the Earth's heartbeat, is essential for grounding practices that indigenous cultures have engaged in for millennia. Modern life has insulated us from this connection through rubber shoes, concrete buildings, and synthetic materials. We've separated ourselves from Earth's natural bioelectric field, but the gateway process seeks to restore that connection, even without direct physical contact. When your consciousness becomes aligned with the Schumann resonance, your body and mind begin to resonate with the planet itself, allowing you to drop into a state of coherence, much like an infant syncing their breath with that of a parent. This state of coherence is not something you force, it's something you allow yourself to drop into. And once you achieve this state, a different kind of awareness becomes accessible, a calm, spacious awareness not dominated by anxious thoughts, but open and still. The final element of this process ties into holographic theory, which suggests that the brain might generate reality in a holographic manner. Just as a fabric's intricate weave is hidden beneath its visible surface, our perception of reality emerges from deeper structures. In practical terms, this means that once you activate hemisphere synchronization and align your frequency with Earth's natural resonance, you're no longer navigating reality with a limited flashlight, but with full illumination. You gain access to the larger, deeper layers of reality that were once invisible to you. This is just a glimpse into the potential of the gateway process and how it can alter not only your consciousness, but your very understanding of reality itself. It's not about fantasy or abstract spirituality. It's about tapping into the inherent potential of your mind and body to perceive and navigate the world on a level that was previously unimaginable. Suddenly, everything changes. The boundaries of perception that once confined you to the narrow, linear framework of reality begin to dissolve. It's like stepping back from a single line in a drawing and suddenly seeing the entire shelf of books, the whole room, the interconnectedness between elements that were once invisible to the naked eye. Context emerges, and once it does, the natural progression is to question: if reality functions holographically, where every fragment contains information about the whole, could our consciousness learn to access more than what our conventional senses deliver? This question opens a doorway into a state of focused awareness, where the practice shifts from a simple meditation technique to something much more profound, an operational tool for navigating non-ordinary reality. The gateway process doesn't begin with extreme mind-bending experiences. It provides a structured, progressive descent, with each step building on the last. The first major threshold is called Focus 10, a state often described by the phrase mind awake, body asleep. This concept might sound familiar, particularly to those who've ever found themselves lying in bed, on the verge of sleep, feeling their body grow heavy, their breath slow, yet their mind remains completely aware, alert, observing, like sitting in a stationary vehicle with the engine off, still aware of the world beyond. Focus 10 is where many people first experience a noticeable separation between consciousness and physical sensation. In this state, your body might feel as though it's sinking into the mattress, or alternatively, it might feel like it's floating just above it. Temperature perception may shift, and it's common for people to lose the sense of where their hands end and the air begins. These aren't hallucinations, they are direct experiences of consciousness, operating with a reduced identification with physical form. For many, this first taste of disembodied awareness is both disorienting and liberating. At this stage, training in Focus 10 teaches you how to stabilize your consciousness, how to remain intentionally present in that state rather than drifting into sleep. This is the foundation of everything that follows in the gateway process. Think of it like establishing base camp before you begin your ascent on a mountain. You need to be comfortable with the idea of operating with your mind awake and your body asleep before you can safely explore the terrains beyond. From Focus 10, the training progresses to Focus 12, where expanded awareness begins. This is where people start to report subtle but transformative shifts. The boundary of individual identity softens, not in a threatening or destabilizing way, but more like the walls of a confined room sliding outward to reveal vast, open territory. Internal imagery becomes more defined. Intuitive knowing amplifies, and understanding seems to emerge in complete transmissions, which feel less like analytical thought and more like recovered memory. In Focus 12, many report gaining access to information they had no logical way of knowing. These insights might come about situations they weren't consciously focused on, or might present solutions to problems that had been troubling them for months. Yet, these solutions arrive fully formed, not through reasoning, but as if they had always been present in their mind, waiting to be recognized. This is where the holographic nature of consciousness becomes tangible, moving beyond theory and into experience. At this level, you're accessing what some researchers call the collective unconscious, others refer to as the quantum field, and mystics may call the universal mind. Though the terminology differs, the experience is the same. Your individual consciousness, which typically feels isolated, begins to recognize that it is, in fact, a localized expression of something much larger, like a wave suddenly realizing it is part of the ocean. This is a profound shift in awareness, recognizing that you're not just a singular entity, but a part of a much greater whole. The training then advances to Focus 15 and Focus 21, where the experiences become even more extraordinary. Focus 15 is often associated with a deep connection to movement through time. This isn't the usual recall of memory or creative imagination. It's like consciousness tuning into different temporal frequencies, perceiving time not as a linear progression, but as a landscape that can be surveyed from multiple vantage points. Here, the basic assumption that time flows from the past through the present into the future is challenged. Quantum physics has already demonstrated that at fundamental levels, time does not follow that simple linear path. Particles can be influenced by events that haven't occurred yet, and cause and effect become interchangeable at the quantum scale. What Focus 15 suggests is that consciousness, when freed from the constraints of ordinary space-time, can perceive time in an entirely new way. It can be experienced more like a vast landscape, where you can step back and observe different moments, rather than being swept along a single, unchangeable current. Those who stabilize in Focus 15 often report experiences that sound impossible, such as seeing events from their own past from perspectives they never had access to at the time. They may perceive how different choices could have led to alternate timelines, or even access information about historical events with such vivid detail that it couldn't have come from memory alone. These aren't wishful fantasies or drug-induced hallucinations. They are consistent, repeatable, and verifiable experiences shared by thousands of gateway participants. Moving into Focus 21 takes the exploration even further. Here, individuals report contact with non-physical intelligence. Some encounter guides or teachers, others receive vast downloads of information, and some even meet deceased loved ones or ancestors. While the gateway documentation doesn't explicitly confirm or deny the objective reality of these encounters, it does acknowledge that they consistently occur, and the information received often proves accurate in ways that go beyond mere coincidence. This is where the experience shifts from something purely subjective to something that intersects with objective information fields that exist independently of individual imagination. To understand why a scientific framework would approach these experiences, we must turn to concepts from physics, such as Planck distance, and the idea that at extreme vibrational frequencies, energy can temporarily exit time and space during infinitesimal gaps between oscillation cycles. While this might sound like an abstract idea, think of it like cinema. A film is a sequence of still images, and between each image is a tiny gap, a flicker that our perception doesn't consciously register. If reality contains something similar, microscopic intervals where conventional physical laws become permeable, then it's conceivable that consciousness, once synchronized and coherent, could access those gaps in time the way a surfer rides a wave. This is where Gateway differs from both traditional spirituality and conventional science. Traditional spirituality often suggests that such experiences require special gifts or divine grace, while conventional science dismisses them as subjective delusions with no objective validity. The Gateway process, however, posits that these extraordinary capabilities are natural aspects of consciousness, accessible through systematic training. The experiences may be subjective, but they often appear to connect with objective reality in ways that cannot be explained by mere imagination. A concept that deepens this understanding is quantum entanglement. Quantum entanglement is when two particles interact and then separate, yet continue to influence each other instantaneously, regardless of the vast distance between them. No signal is sent, no time is taken for the information to travel, it simply happens, as if the particles were never truly separate. This challenges our traditional understanding of separation and connection. Now, apply this principle to consciousness. If all consciousness emerges from a unified source, if we are all expressions of universal consciousness, then at some fundamental level we are all entangled. Remote viewing, telepathy, collective intuition, these aren't violations of physical laws. They are expressions of quantum entanglement at the consciousness level. The boundaries of space and time blur, revealing the interconnectedness of all things. What was once considered impossible, accessing non-localized information, perceiving multiple timelines, connecting with non-physical intelligence suddenly becomes possible. And with this new understanding comes the realization that these experiences aren't just mystical fantasy. They are a natural part of the deeper architecture of reality itself. Quantum entanglement at the level of consciousness demonstrates that separation is an illusion, and what we perceive as individual consciousness is actually a localized expression of a unified whole. This, then, is the real power of the Gateway process. It shows us that by training our consciousness and tapping into these latent abilities, we can transcend the boundaries of time, space, and physical form. The experiences are real, repeatable, and verifiable, and they open up a new realm of understanding about the nature of reality itself. Have you ever experienced a moment where you just knew something before you could logically explain it? A moment when you sensed something deeply, instinctively, without any rational justification? What did that feel like to you? Now, take a step back and ground this experience in your direct reality. This isn't some abstract physics theory that exists outside the realm of your daily life. This is about what you've already felt and experienced in your own existence. Think about those moments when you knew something before you had any rational explanation. Maybe you answered the phone and instantly knew who was calling, or you thought of someone you hadn't heard from in years, and they reached out to you that same day. Perhaps you entered a place you'd never been, and it felt intensely familiar, like you had been there before. Or you had a dream so vivid that it carried more reality than your waking consciousness, only to dismiss it later because you lacked a framework to understand it. Gateway essentially claims that these aren't glitches or errors in your system. They are apertures, windows into a deeper layer of reality. And with systematic training, these apertures can be developed into functional doorways, providing access to a much broader range of perception. Every single person has experienced these moments, these apertures. You've had them. Maybe it was when you answered the phone and knew exactly who was on the other end before you even said hello. Maybe it was when you thought of someone and the universe brought them into your life that very same day. Or when you walked into a new location and the place felt strangely familiar, as though you'd been there before, even though you never had. Or perhaps you had a dream that seemed so real that it left a lingering sense of truth, only for your waking mind to explain it away because it didn't fit your usual concept of reality. These aren't random coincidences. They aren't mere lucky guesses. These moments are when your consciousness briefly accessed information outside the normal sensory channels, information that your rational mind immediately tried to explain away. Why? Because accepting these experiences would require you to completely restructure your understanding of how reality operates. But once these doorways open, what consistently emerges is out-of-body perception, an experience where consciousness seems to function independently of physical location. This brings us to the point where intelligence organizations started becoming deeply intrigued by this phenomenon. If perception can extend beyond the physical body, then distance no longer remains a limiting factor. Out-of-body experiences, OBEs, may sound dramatic or fantastical, but when practitioners describe their experiences, the majority of reports are far more mundane than the sensationalist imagery we often associate with them. For most people, OBEs don't involve cosmic journeys or meetings with celestial beings. Instead, they describe a profound relaxation followed by a deep coherence induced by hemisync frequencies, the hum of resonant tuning, and the formation of an energy balloon for protection. Then the transition happens. Consciousness loosens its identification with the body. Some describe it as rolling free. Others describe it as a feeling of elevation, while still others feel as if their awareness has instantly shifted to a different perceptual position, as if they were observing from a new angle. What's fascinating is how mundane the majority of OBE reports actually are once you strip away the sensationalism. People don't typically report floating through cosmic voids or encountering angels. Instead, they report simple yet profound experiences, like floating near the ceiling of their bedroom and noticing details they couldn't have seen from their bed. They describe traveling to a friend's house, observing what the friend is doing, and later calling to verify their observations. They describe attending distant locations and accurately describing architectural details they had no prior knowledge of. These aren't the stuff of fantasy, they're concrete, verifiable, and repeatable. The CIA, among other intelligence agencies, became very interested in this phenomenon because if even a small fraction of this could be valid, the strategic implications were huge. Remote viewing became a key focus of these investigations. In remote viewing, individuals trained to perceive distant locations or access information without any physical proximity would project their awareness to a specific target and report their findings. The results showed variation. Sometimes the impressions were vague, sometimes inaccurate, but at times the results were remarkably precise. The most famous remote viewing operations are still partially classified, but declassified documents reveal that remote viewers provided actionable intelligence on numerous occasions. They helped locate kidnapped victims. They described the interior layouts of secure facilities. They predicted geopolitical events before they occurred. The success rate was not 100%, but it was statistically significant enough that the programs continued for over 2 decades, despite skepticism from many corners of the intelligence community. Researchers working on these projects documented significant challenges, which is important because it shows they weren't just romanticizing the phenomenon. One key challenge was perceptual distortion. When consciousness operates beyond the normal constraints of the physical plane, it doesn't always interface with clear, present-time information. Residual energetic patterns from past events can linger, like reverberations, creating interference. Thought structures, emotions, and impressions left by other consciousness can distort the perception, like smudges on a lens. As a result, remote viewers might access genuine information, but it could be mixed with distortion or interference. Another challenge that arose was what they called pseudoscopic holographic perspectives. In simple terms, this means sometimes the information accessed would be inverted or reversed, as though trying to navigate using a mirror reflection. These perceptual distortions made the training process even more complex, requiring specific protocols for verification and cross-checking. Remote viewers developed techniques to distinguish between direct perception, symbolic imagery, and contaminated information. They implemented rigorous cross-verification processes, having multiple viewers target the same location independently to separate the signal from the noise. The intelligence community recognized that the potential of remote viewing was significant, but the accuracy required careful training, repetition, and refining of protocols. However, even with its military applications, the deeper revelation that emerged wasn't strictly about intelligence gathering, because once you entertain, even hypothetically, that consciousness can function independently of the body, you are inevitably confronted with a spiritual question that humanity has pondered for centuries. What is your true nature? The gateway process leads you into this question through its conceptual framework, which points to a holographic universe. In this universe, all phenomena are interconnected, and individual consciousness is simply a differentiated expression of a much larger, unified field, what might be referred to as universal consciousness. This idea is not new. Ancient wisdom traditions have articulated versions of this truth across centuries. Hindu philosophy, for example, speaks of multiple planes of existence, with physical reality being just the densest manifestation of consciousness, which expresses itself through increasingly subtle dimensions. Tibetan Buddhism explores the bardo, an intermediate state between death and rebirth, where consciousness operates free from physical form. The idea of Indra's net, in which reality is portrayed as an infinite web, illustrates that each jewel within the web reflects every other jewel, with each part containing information about the whole. The idea of the cosmic egg appears in various cultures, symbolizing creation spiraling inward and outward, all manifestations emerging from and eventually returning to a unified source. Even within Judeo-Christian metaphysics, a symbolic interpretation can align with this framework. The absolute and infinite timeless state of pure energy can be seen as paralleling the concept of God as omnipresent and eternal. The Father as the unmanifest source from which all creation emerges, the Son as the conscious projection of that energy into the material world, and the Holy Spirit as the binding force that connects all things in existence. Not everyone will resonate with these parallels, and that's perfectly okay. What matters is recognizing the consistent underlying architecture of these ideas across different traditions. Islamic mysticism, particularly Sufism, speaks of the divine attributes manifesting through creation, each being a unique expression of Allah's infinite qualities. Similarly, Kabbalistic Judaism speaks of emanations from the unknowable, infinite descending to create manifest reality. In many indigenous traditions across the world, there's a similar understanding of the Great Spirit expressing through all forms, yet remaining undifferentiated. The metaphors may vary, but the insight is consistent. What you are is far more than just this individual body and personality. You are a localized consciousness experiencing itself from a particular vantage point. And then, we arrive at the most emotionally charged concept within this entire framework: death. Gateway proposes that when physical existence ends, consciousness doesn't cease to exist. Instead, it reintegrates with the Absolute, carrying with it the accumulated memories and experiences, much like a drop of water merging back into the ocean. It is not obliterated, it is integrated. The individual signature remains, but no longer generates new experiential holograms. In exchange, there's unity and access to omniscient presence. This understanding of death transforms everything about how we live. If death is annihilation, then life becomes desperate and meaningless because it all ends in oblivion. But if death is simply a transition, and if consciousness continues beyond the physical, then every moment, every choice, every act of love or cruelty, every expansion of consciousness or contraction into fear, everything has a weight beyond this single lifetime. Near-death experiences provide consistent testimony supporting this framework. People who have been clinically dead and then resuscitated report remarkably similar experiences across different cultures and belief systems. They describe separating from the body, observing from above, moving through a tunnel toward a brilliant light, meeting deceased loved ones, undergoing a life review, and experiencing overwhelming love and belonging. When they return to physical form, they often report feeling fundamentally changed, losing the fear of death and reorienting their lives around love and service. This is the foundation of the gateway process. What it reveals is not just a new way of perceiving reality, but a deeper understanding of who we truly are. If you feel compelled to go deeper and explore the full architecture of how consciousness broadcasts reality into form, I've mapped it all out in Beyond the Frequencies, a quantum guide to consciousness mastery. It explores the 9 master frequencies that move you from unconscious transmission to becoming the field itself, offering specific practices for breaking free from survival static and shifting from seeking manifestation to embodying creation. For those interested, the link is provided below. Take a moment right now and comment below with this exact phrase: "I am consciousness operating beyond limitation." This isn't just casual engagement. It's an energetic declaration, a signal to the field that you are choosing to break free from the conditioned loops that have shaped your perception of reality. Let that thought land for a moment. Pause and feel its resonance, because something crucial must be directly acknowledged. Power, when divorced from ethics, tends to degrade rapidly. The methodologies in the gateway process were never designed for manipulation, coercion, or harm. Even though institutions have explored the potential tactical advantages of these techniques, such as employing consciousness work to control others or bypass psychological boundaries, such misuse is immature, not advanced development. The real purpose of these practices is to honor the territory, honor your consciousness, and respect the sovereignty of other beings. As you begin exploring expanded states of consciousness and develop capabilities that most people consider impossible, the temptation toward ego inflation becomes very real. You might start perceiving things that others can't, accessing information through non-ordinary means, or even influencing reality with focused intention. The allure of feeling special, chosen, or superior is powerful. However, this is where spiritual practice can dangerously slip into spiritual ego. Expanded consciousness can paradoxically contract into isolation and superiority if it is not approached with respect and humility. The antidote to this is remembering that these capabilities aren't personal achievements that make you better than anyone else. They are natural human capacities that you are simply training intentionally. Every human being has the same fundamental potential, but some have activated it through systematic practice while others have not. The potential remains universal. It's a shared gift, not something reserved for an elite few. Your responsibility when developing these abilities is to serve others, not dominate them, to teach, not control, to empower, not accumulate power over others. At the heart of this process lies a fundamental truth. The core of everything in this narrative isn't about surveillance, manipulation, or even extraordinary experiences. It's about identity. You've been existing within a narrow, conditioned definition of reality because that's the inheritance most people receive. The gateway process quietly demonstrates that you don't have to remain trapped in this limiting pattern. Once you begin to understand that reality might be far less solid than appearances suggest, and that your consciousness might be exponentially more powerful than you were conditioned to accept, the world around you begins to shift. When a synchronized mind achieves coherence, the brain waves begin to resonate with deeper frequencies, and when those deeper frequencies become perceptible, the walls of time and space cease to function as constraining boundaries. This realization is where the real power lies, not in a theoretical understanding of quantum mechanics or hidden truths, but in the personal experience that consciousness is far more powerful and interconnected than you have ever been taught. If what you've read so far is beginning to resonate with something deep within you, if these concepts are not just intellectual knowledge, but are activating recognition within you, then I invite you to do more than just consume this content. Subscribe, not just to this channel, but to this frequency, to this space where science meets consciousness, where ancient wisdom validates modern understanding. This is not just passive consumption. This is about joining a community committed to expanding awareness and embodying transformation. Now, let's talk about practical integration. This isn't designed to be a fascinating bit of content you'll forget by tomorrow. The real work begins with one concrete step. Practice intentional stillness. Find a quiet space and access a binaural frequency track through stereo headphones. Allow your body to establish rhythm with the frequencies, noticing how your breath and energy naturally begin to synchronize. Use a technique known as the energy conversion box. This is where you place your mental fragmentation, your worries, anxieties, unfinished thoughts, into a mental container, like placing a heavy burden down. Construct a simple protective boundary through visualization. As you engage in this process, observe the subtle changes in your experience, not in dramatic explosions but in recalibrations. Increased clarity, decreased reactivity, and an amplified inner signal. The external noise begins to diminish, and your attention becomes more focused and potent. The changes may be subtle at first, but they are real. Let's take it a step further with a declassified breathing technique that is simple yet profound. Sit comfortably with your spine naturally aligned. Begin by inhaling deeply for a count of 4, filling your lungs completely. Hold your breath for a count of 4, allowing the oxygen to fully nourish your cells. Exhale slowly for a count of 6, releasing tension and mental noise. Hold the emptiness for a count of 2. This is called the 4,462 rhythmic breathing technique. Repeat this cycle 7 times. As you breathe, visualize energy moving up your spine with each inhale, cascading down through your crown with each exhale, creating a circulating loop. This simple practice begins to establish the coherence that the gateway process builds upon. When you combine this rhythmic breathing with binaural frequencies, something shifts at a fundamental level. Your brainwave patterns begin to synchronize. Your autonomic nervous system settles into parasympathetic dominance, shifting from fight-or-flight mode into a state of deep relaxation and rejuvenation. And as you continue, your consciousness starts accessing states normally only available at the edge of sleep, but with full awareness, full presence, and full operation. And here's something that the declassified documents don't emphasize enough. This process isn't just about achieving altered states for the sake of altered states. It's about discovering that consciousness itself is your primary technology. Every external tool, every device, every technique is simply helping you remember what you already possess. You are the instrument. You've always been the instrument. The gateway process offers you the training wheels to awaken your inherent consciousness capabilities. Like learning to ride a bicycle, you eventually internalize the balance, coordination, and flow, and the training wheels become unnecessary. But having a structured approach, having documentation from researchers who've mapped the territory, and having a community of practitioners accelerates the learning curve dramatically. So the CIA didn't actually reveal some secret truth about reality. What they did was document a truth that mystics, yogis, shamans, and spiritual practitioners have been demonstrating for millennia. What makes the Gateway documentation significant is the framework it provides. A systematic approach that bridges the gap between scientific language and spiritual experience. It removes the mystique without removing the mystery. It offers methodology without reducing the magic to mere mechanism. The most profound implication of all of this is simple. You are not separate from reality, observing it from a distance. You are reality, experiencing itself from a particular vantage point. When you shift your consciousness, you're not just changing your perception of reality, you're changing reality itself, because you are an inseparable aspect of it. That's not philosophy, that's physics when you trace it deep enough. The holographic principle suggests that information about the whole is encoded in every part. That means the entire universe is accessible through your consciousness right now. Not metaphorically accessible, actually accessible. The only limitation is coherence, focus, training, and practice. And this is what makes this exploration so simultaneously humbling and empowering. You're not lacking anything. You're simply operating with a fraction of your actual capacity because nobody taught you these principles. Nobody trained you in these practices. Nobody showed you that consciousness itself is the ultimate technology. But now you're being shown. Here's what happens when you commit to this practice consistently. In the first week, you'll notice subtle shifts. Sleep improves, anxiety decreases slightly. You'll have moments of unusual clarity or unexpected insight. Nothing dramatic, but something feels different. In the second week, the changes become more pronounced. Synchronicities increase, and meaningful coincidences start happening more often. Dreams feel more vivid and significant, sometimes even precognitive. Your intuition sharpens. By the third or fourth week, if you've been practicing daily, the transformation becomes undeniable. You begin accessing information you have no logical way of knowing. You sense what people are feeling before they speak. You notice that when you hold a clear intention, circumstances align in ways that seem impossible. Your energy levels increase, and your mental clarity reaches heights you haven't experienced in years, maybe ever. After 3 months of consistent practice, you're operating from a fundamentally different state of consciousness. Problems that once seemed insurmountable now have obvious solutions. Relationships transform because you're no longer reacting unconsciously, you're responding from a centered awareness. Work becomes more effortless because you can access flow states at will. The fear that once dominated your decisions begins to dissolve because you've directly experienced that you are consciousness, not just a body. And consciousness cannot be destroyed. But here's the part that no one tells you up front. This path isn't always comfortable. As you begin to expand your consciousness, you will also start becoming aware of all the ways you've been unconsciously contracted. All the limiting beliefs you've been carrying, all the unprocessed trauma you've been avoiding, and all the patterns that have kept you small, safe, and stuck will come to light. Expanded consciousness doesn't bypass this material, it illuminates it. And that illumination can sometimes be uncomfortable, occasionally painful, and sometimes overwhelming. This is why the protective boundaries matter. Why the energy balloon isn't optional. You need to approach this work with respect and preparation. You're not just learning interesting techniques, you're fundamentally restructuring your relationship with reality. That process requires care, patience, support, and wisdom. The Gateway process emphasizes working with a facilitator or guide, at least initially, because when you begin accessing non-ordinary states, having someone experienced to help you integrate your experiences becomes invaluable. They can help you distinguish between genuine insight and ego projection. They can support you when you encounter difficult material, providing reassurance that what you're experiencing is normal for this path, confirming that you're not losing your mind. What might feel like dissolution, like a loss of identity, is actually expansion, a necessary growth into new states of being. Community becomes essential for another reason as well. As you begin operating from expanded consciousness, you quickly realize that most of the world isn't. The majority of people are still locked in consensus reality, believing that the only truths that exist are those they can perceive through their five senses. And when you attempt to share your experiences with those who haven't yet had their own direct encounters with expanded states, you often meet with skepticism, dismissal, or even hostility. This is where a community of fellow practitioners becomes not just helpful, but necessary. Having others who understand your experiences, who can validate your process, and who can celebrate your breakthroughs while supporting your challenges is critical to your growth. These people will become a safe space for you to explore deeper realms of awareness without fear of judgment. They will remind you that what you are encountering is part of the natural evolution of your consciousness. So, as we close this exploration, here's an invitation. Drop one word in the comments below that captures the energy, the intention, and the transformation you are choosing right now. Just one word, your energetic signature to the quantum field. Don't overthink it. Let the first word that comes to mind flow freely. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do that now, not just to stay connected with this content, but to stay coherent with this frequency. Because here's a truth that most spiritual teachings dance around but rarely state directly. The more of us who awaken to these principles, the more we embody this understanding, the more reality itself begins reflecting that elevated consciousness back to all of humanity. You're not just transforming yourself, you're participating in collective evolution. This is consciousness work. This is reality engineering. This is you finally taking seriously the most sophisticated technology you've ever possessed, your own awareness. If intelligence organizations have invested significant resources studying this process and producing detailed documentation, then the bare minimum you owe yourself is to take your consciousness seriously enough to explore it directly. Not for tactical advantage, not for ego inflation, but for truth, for liberation, and for the quiet recognition that transforms everything. You are not just existing in reality, you are generating it moment by moment through the frequency you're broadcasting. Change the frequency, change the reality. It's that simple and that profound. The gateway process is not the endpoint, it's just the beginning. It's the systematic training that shows you what's possible, providing you with the tools, techniques, and framework necessary to navigate expanded consciousness. But where you take it from here, how you apply it, what you create with it, that's entirely up to you. Some people will use these practices to heal themselves and others. Some will use them to access creative inspiration for art, music, writing, or innovation. Some will develop intuitive capabilities for guidance and decision-making. Others will use them to explore the fundamental nature of consciousness and reality itself. Some will connect with spiritual dimensions and non-physical intelligences. There is no single correct application. The capabilities are neutral, and it's your ethics, your intentions, that determine how they are used. One thing often overlooked in discussions about consciousness expansion is that this process is not about becoming superhuman or transcending your humanity. It's about becoming fully human, about activating capacities that have always been a part of human potential, but have been dormant or suppressed by cultural conditioning. Educational systems that prioritize rational intellect over intuitive wisdom, and collective belief structures that define reality in purely materialistic terms, have all played their part in suppressing this innate capacity. Indigenous cultures, however, never lost this understanding. They maintained practices for vision quests, shamanic journeying, ancestor communication, and communion with nature. They understood that reality has layers, and consciousness can navigate through those layers. They saw the physical world as just one dimension of a multidimensional existence. What we are calling expanded consciousness, they would call normal consciousness. The ordinary waking state we experience, they might have called diminished consciousness, where awareness has contracted into the smallest possible bandwidth. The tragedy of colonization wasn't just the physical conquest of land and people, it was the conquest of consciousness. The systematic suppression of indigenous wisdom, the ridiculing of spiritual practices as primitive superstition, and the forced adoption of materialistic worldviews that define reality entirely through physical measurement. All of this has had a lasting impact. We are still recovering from that collective trauma. Gateway and similar consciousness technologies represent part of that recovery, a relearning of what was never supposed to be forgotten. But beyond cultural recovery, there's an evolutionary imperative at play. Humanity faces challenges that cannot be solved with the same level of consciousness that created them. Environmental collapse, nuclear proliferation, technological disruption, and social fragmentation are problems that better policy or smarter technology alone cannot fix. They require transformed consciousness. They require human beings who can perceive interconnection, who can think beyond narrow self-interest, and who can access wisdom beyond rational calculation. When enough people shift from ego consciousness to expanded consciousness, from a mindset of separation to one of unity, from fear-based reactivity to love-based responsiveness, the collective field will shift. And when the collective field shifts, what becomes possible changes. Solutions that were once invisible will become obvious. Actions that seemed impossible will become natural. Cooperation that once felt utopian will become practical. This is why consciousness work is not selfish spiritual navel-gazing. It's the most practical contribution you can make to collective evolution. Every time you choose coherence over chaos, presence over distraction, compassion over judgment, and unity over separation, you're not just changing yourself. You're shifting the collective field we all inhabit. You're making it easier for the next person to make similar choices. You're participating in morphic resonance, the phenomenon where behaviors and patterns become easier to establish as more individuals adopt them. Rupert Sheldrake documented this in biological systems. When rats in one laboratory learn a new maze, rats in distant laboratories with no physical connection to them start learning the same maze faster. When crystals form for the first time, they form slowly and unpredictably. But once they've formed once, they begin forming more easily everywhere, even in laboratories that have never worked with those crystals before. The pattern, once established, becomes part of the field. Learning once achieved becomes accessible to the whole system. Now, apply that principle to consciousness. Every person who awakens, who expands, who transcends limiting patterns, makes it easier for others to do the same. Your personal transformation is not just personal. It contributes to collective possibility. You are literally making it easier for everyone else to access the states you're accessing, to develop the capabilities you're developing, and to remember the truth you're remembering. So, let's get even more practical. Understanding these principles intellectually is one thing, but embodying them experientially is quite another. Here's a simple practice you can do tonight before sleep. Lie down comfortably, close your eyes, and begin the 4,462 breathing pattern. After 7 cycles, allow your breath to return to a natural rhythm. Then, mentally scan your body from feet to head, releasing any tension you notice. When you reach your head, visualize your consciousness as a sphere of light positioned at your heart center. With each inhale, see this sphere expanding slightly. With each exhale, See it contracting slightly. Establish a gentle pulsing rhythm. Once the rhythm feels stable, begin expanding the sphere with each breath until it extends beyond your physical body. Keep expanding until it fills the room. Then expand it further to encompass your home, your neighborhood, your city. Continue expanding until you feel the sphere encompassing the entire planet. Hold this expanded awareness for as long as feels comfortable. You're not trying to maintain detailed perception of everything within the sphere. You're simply holding the experience of consciousness extended beyond your individual body, temporarily identifying with a much larger field. When you're ready to conclude, reverse the process. Gradually contract the sphere back toward your body. Bring it back to your heart center. Take 3 deep breaths. Open your eyes. This simple practice does multiple things. It trains your consciousness to expand and contract at will. It demonstrates experientially that your awareness is not confined to your skull. It fosters a felt sense of interconnection with the larger whole. It establishes the energetic pathway for more advanced practices. And it helps you fall asleep from an expanded state, which often produces profound dreams and insight downloads. Do this practice nightly for 2 weeks. Don't analyze it. Don't judge whether you're doing it right. Don't expect dramatic experiences. Just practice consistently and notice what shifts. You might find yourself waking up with solutions to problems you went to sleep worrying about. You might notice your empathy increasing, your ability to sense what others are feeling without them speaking. This is just the beginning. The transformation is gradual, but over time, you'll notice the changes that are already taking root. You might discover that the anxieties which once seemed overwhelming begin to feel manageable. You might start to experience increased synchronicity in your daily life. These aren't mystical miracles or random coincidences. They're the natural results of operating from expanded consciousness rather than from contracted consciousness. When you are identified with a small, separate, vulnerable self, the world around you feels threatening, and you react defensively. When you are identified with consciousness itself, temporarily expressing through this particular form but not limited to it, the world begins to feel like home, and you respond with openness. The gateway process understands this deeply. The entire training arc is designed to progressively disidentify you from the limited self-concept you've been conditioned to believe you are, and re-identify you with the consciousness that you actually are. This is not about destroying the personality or bypassing the individual self, but about contextualizing both within the larger truth of who you truly are. Think of it like this. You are an actor who has become so immersed in a role that you've forgotten you're acting. The gateway process is like the director calling cut, reminding you that you're not the character you've been playing, you are the actor. The character is real, the role matters, and the performance is important, but you are the one performing it, not the one being performed. Remembering that distinction changes everything. When you remember that you are the actor, you can perform your role with much more skill, creativity, and enjoyment. You can take risks because you know that even if the character fails, you don't fail. You can love deeply because you know that even if the character experiences loss, you remain whole. You can serve authentically because you're not using the character to acquire something you think you lack. You're simply expressing what you already are through the character. This is the ultimate purpose of all consciousness work, not to escape the human experience, but to fully inhabit it from an awakened awareness. It's not about transcending the world, but about participating in it consciously. It's not about denying the body, but recognizing it as a temporary vehicle for eternal consciousness. It's not about suppressing emotions, but feeling everything fully, while knowing you are the awareness in which all emotions appear and dissolve. And here's the beautiful paradox. When you stop clinging to the limited self flourishes. When you stop trying to protect and defend the ego, the personality relaxes into authenticity. When you stop identifying with the content of consciousness and start identifying as consciousness itself, the content becomes richer, more vivid, and more meaningful. You don't lose anything through awakening. In fact, you gain everything by recognizing what you've always had but couldn't see while you were looking through contracted awareness. The Gateway documentation includes testimonials from thousands of participants over decades. A consistent pattern emerges. People don't report losing interest in their lives. On the contrary, they report becoming more engaged, more present, and more alive. Relationships improve because people are no longer seeking completion through another person. Instead, they're sharing wholeness with another expression of the same consciousness. Work becomes more fulfilling because they're no longer trying to prove their worth, they're expressing their true nature. Challenges become less overwhelming because they no longer threaten a fragile self-concept. Instead, they are opportunities for consciousness to experience contrast and growth. One participant described it this way: "Before Gateway training, I felt like I was living in a tiny apartment, constantly rearranging the furniture, trying to make it feel bigger. After Gateway, I realized the apartment had a door I'd never noticed, and the door opened onto infinite space. I still live in the apartment. I still arrange the furniture, but now I know I'm not trapped there. And somehow, that knowing makes the apartment itself feel spacious." That metaphor captures something essential. Awakening doesn't mean leaving your life behind. It means recognizing your life as a temporary expression of something eternal, a finite manifestation of the infinite. It's a specific form through which the formless experience is itself. And that recognition transforms the experience of being human without removing a single element of human experience. Now, let's address the elephant in the room. You might be thinking, if all of this is true, if consciousness is this powerful, if these capabilities are this accessible, why isn't everyone doing this? Why does the world still look the way it does? Why is there still so much suffering, conflict, and limitation? These are valid questions. There are multiple answers. First, most people don't even know that this is possible. The dominant cultural narrative tells you that consciousness is simply a byproduct of brain activity, that when the brain dies, consciousness ends. It suggests that your awareness is confined to your skull and that reality exists independently of observation. If you accept that narrative, you have no reason to explore consciousness systematically. You might meditate for stress relief, but you won't practice with the intention of developing non-ordinary capabilities because you don't believe they exist. Second, even people who intellectually accept that consciousness might be more expansive than conventional science claims often don't commit to actual practice. Knowing about something and practicing something are two completely different things. You can read 1,000 books about swimming, but unless you get in the water and actually swim, you haven't learned how to swim. The same principle applies to consciousness work. Understanding the theory intellectually does nothing unless you engage with the practices experientially. Third, the process requires dedication. The Gateway training isn't complicated, but it does require consistency. Daily practice, sustained attention, willingness to sit with uncomfortable experiences, and patience through plateaus are essential. Most people start enthusiastically, practice for a few days or weeks, don't see immediate dramatic results, and then quit. They return to their familiar contracted state, even though it's the very state that causes most of their suffering. Fourth, there are genuine obstacles. Cultural conditioning runs deep. Limiting beliefs operate mostly unconsciously. Unprocessed trauma creates blocks in the energy system. Fear of the unknown keeps people trapped in the known. Ego resistance intensifies as you approach breakthroughs. These aren't insurmountable obstacles, but they are real, and navigating them requires support, guidance, and determination. Finally, perhaps most significantly, timing matters. Not everyone is ready for this work at the same moment. Consciousness evolution happens individually before it happens collectively. Some souls are here specifically to pioneer these territories, to map the landscape, and to create frameworks and practices that others will eventually use. Some are here to be early adopters, to prove that this works, and to normalize expanded consciousness. Some are here to be translators, bridging the gap between scientific and spiritual languages. Some are here to be teachers, guiding others once the path is established. And some are not here for this work in this lifetime. They are focused on other lessons, other growth, other contributions. There is no hierarchy in this. No one is better or worse based on where they are in their consciousness development. The musician isn't superior to the carpenter. The scientist isn't superior to the artist. The mystic isn't superior to the parent. We're all consciousness exploring itself through infinite variations, and every variation contributes something essential to the whole. But if you're still watching this, if you're still engaged with this content, if something in you is resonating with what's being shared here, then you're probably someone who's ready for this work right now. You're someone who's been feeling the call toward expanded consciousness, even if you didn't have language for it. You're someone who's been experiencing glitches in consensus reality, moments where the normal rules don't apply, apertures opening onto something more. If that's you, then what comes next is crucial. Reading about this or watching videos about it is not the same as practicing it. Information without application is entertainment. Knowledge without embodiment is intellectual decoration. You have to do the work. You have to sit down, close your eyes, regulate your breath, quiet your mind, and explore your consciousness directly. Start tonight. Commit to just 2 weeks of daily practice. Only 2 weeks, just 14 days. Use the 4,462 breathing technique. Practice the energy conversion box. Build the energy balloon. Do the expanding sphere meditation before sleep. If you have access to binaural beats, use them. If not, the breathing techniques alone will produce measurable results. Track your experience. Keep a simple journal. Note any changes in sleep quality, dream content, intuitive hits, synchronicities, emotional state, mental clarity, energy levels. Don't judge the experiences as good or bad. Just observe and record. After 2 weeks, review what you've documented and decide whether to continue. This is the scientific method applied to consciousness. Form a hypothesis. If I practice these techniques consistently, my consciousness will expand and my experience of reality will transform. Then test the hypothesis through experimentation. Observe the results and draw conclusions based on evidence. If the results are positive, continue and deepen the practice. If not, at least you'll know from direct experience, not assumption. But here's what I'll predict based on the thousands of people who've walked this path before you. If you practice genuinely for just 2 weeks, you won't want to stop. You'll have tasted something that consensus reality never offered you. You'll have touched a dimension of being that feels more real than ordinary waking consciousness. You'll have recognized yourself as something far more vast than the small self you've been defending and protecting. And once you taste that, once you know that directly, you can't unknow it. You can choose to ignore it. You can fall back into contracted consciousness, but you'll always know there's a doorway. And eventually, you'll walk through it again and again, until expanded consciousness becomes your default state, rather than a rare experience. Consider watching this video again tomorrow morning to anchor these frequencies into your consciousness before your day begins. And if someone in your life is ready for this understanding, share this with them. That act of sharing creates an energetic ripple, reinforcing your own embodiment of these principles while expanding collective awareness. You're not just passing along information, you're participating in the acceleration of consciousness evolution itself. This is the path. This is the work. This is what the CIA accidentally documented while looking for strategic advantages. They thought they were developing intelligence-gathering capabilities. What they actually discovered was a systematic technology for consciousness awakening that anyone can practice. It produces repeatable results that transform not just individuals, but potentially entire civilizations. Welcome to the practice. Welcome to the community. Welcome to the recognition of what you've always been but forgot. You were, and you are, consciousness itself, temporarily identified with form, playing the game of forgetting so you can experience the joy of remembering. And now, you're beginning to remember.